The little black girl told the biker she saw hands pull someone into a root cellar beneath the forest shack. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get started with the story. It was a quiet, peaceful afternoon in the small town of Riverton. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm orange glow over the town. For most people, it was just another day, another chance to relax after a long week. But for one little girl, this was the beginning of something she would never forget. Her name was Aisha Coleman, a young black girl with wide, innocent eyes that seemed to absorb everything around her. She had been playing near the edge of the forest, just a few steps from the house where her family lived. Her mother had told her to stay close, but Aisha had wandered farther than she had intended, lost in her imagination, as children often are. That's when she saw it, something that would change everything. As she walked along the dirt path that led deeper into the woods, Aisha's eyes caught movement near the old, abandoned shack that had stood there for as long as she could remember. It was the kind of shack that everyone avoided, rotting wood, broken windows, and a yard overgrown with weeds. She had never seen anyone near it, and she had always been told to stay away. But today, something seemed different. Curiosity tugged at her, and despite the unease that settled in her stomach, she took a step closer. That's when she saw the hands. They were large, rough hands, pulling someone she could not see, into the ground beneath the shack. Aisha froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the faintest sounds of struggle, whispers, muffled cries, and then silence. Terrified, she stumbled back, her mind racing. Who were they? What was happening beneath that old shack? Without thinking, she ran. She ran as fast as her small legs could carry her, tears streaming down her face as she made her way toward the carnival ground where the local bikers often gathered. They were always there, these bikers, tough, intimidating, but for some reason, she trusted them. They were the kind of people you could count on when things got dark, when the world felt wrong. She had seen them at the carnival before, helping people, being kind to children. They were different from what people expected. She ran up to the group of bikers, her breath ragged, her voice trembling as she spoke. Please, you have to help. They took him. They took my brother. I saw them pull him under the shack. The bikers, who had been chatting amongst themselves, stopped in their tracks. Jack, the leader of the group, looked at her, his face hard but softening with concern as he kneeled down to her level. Where did this happen? He asked. In the woods. Near the shack, she gasped, her eyes wide with fear. The bikers exchanged glances, their expressions serious now. All right, kid. We're going to take care of this. You're safe now, Jack said, standing up. He turned to his crew. Let's go. We ride. No questions, no hesitation. The engines of the motorcycles roared to life, their sound cutting through the air like thunder. Aisha climbed onto one of the bikes, clutching Jack's jacket as they sped off toward the forest. The path was narrow, the trees closing in around them as the bikers raced through the woods, the sound of their engines drowning out the rest of the world. They knew they were heading into danger, but they also knew they couldn't turn back. There was a child in need, and that was all that mattered. As they neared the shack, the tension in the air grew thick. Aisha pointed towards the house, her face pale with fear. Jack signaled for the group to stop, and the bikers dismounted, their eyes scanning the area for any sign of movement. The shack loomed in front of them, dark and ominous. The air was still, the silence almost unbearable. Jack motioned for the group to move in closer, every step measured and careful. They could feel something was off, but they couldn't yet see what. The trap had been set, and they were walking right into it. The bikers stood still, their eyes trained on the abandoned shack ahead. The air was thick with tension as the sound of their engines faded into the distance, replaced by the eerie silence of the forest. Aisha, her small hands still gripping Jack's leather vest, felt the weight of the moment settle heavily in her chest. Her brother was out there, somewhere beneath the earth, and she wasn't sure what she would find when they got inside. Jack's voice broke the silence. Stay close, Aisha, he said, his voice calm but firm. We're going to find your brother, I promise. Aisha nodded, trying to steady her breathing, but the fear in her chest wouldn't let go. Jack motioned for his crew to follow him, and they moved as one, like a well-trained unit, their steps synchronized. Each man had his own role, his own task, and they knew how to handle whatever came next. As they reached the porch, the smell of decay hit them, stale air, musty wood, and the faintest trace of something worse. The house had been abandoned for years, and yet there was something alive about it, something dangerous lurking in its walls. Jack pushed the door open slowly, the rusted hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the darkness was oppressive. The only light came from the faint glow of their headlights cutting through the broken windows. Jack led the way, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. The rest of the bikers spread out, covering the perimeter. Anything? Jack whispered to Vince, his second in command. Vince shook his head, his eyes narrowing as he moved deeper into the room. Nothing yet. But this place feels wrong. Jack nodded, his gut telling him the same thing. He motioned for the others to check the rest of the house. But his attention was drawn to the floor. The ground was uneven, the wood warped and cracked, but there was something odd about the area near the corner. A small trapdoor, barely visible, was wedged between two floorboards. It was half hidden, as if someone had tried to conceal it in a hurry. Jack moved toward it, his boots creaking on the old floor as he knelt down to inspect it. Got something here, he called out. The others gathered around as Jack pried the trapdoor open with a knife. Beneath it, the darkness was almost suffocating, but there was a faint, musty odor rising from the cellar below. This is it, Jack said, his voice low. Aisha, stay back. We'll go first. Aisha's eyes widened, her heart pounding as she stepped back, not wanting to be left behind. But Jack's protective instinct kicked in. He wasn't going to let her go down there alone, not after everything she'd been through. The bikers descended into the cellar one by one, their heavy boots echoing in the tight space. The air down here was thick with dust and the scent of damp earth. They couldn't see much, but the faint outline of a figure lying motionless on the floor caught their attention. It was a man, his clothes torn, his body bruised and battered. Who was that? Aisha whispered, her voice trembling. Jack moved closer, kneeling down beside the man. He checked for a pulse and found it weak, but steady. He's alive, Jack said, his voice steady despite the situation. But he's been here for a while. The bikers gathered around, their faces grim. What happened to him? One of them asked. I don't know, Jack replied, glancing at Aisha. But we're not leaving him here. He motioned for the others to help lift the man, and together, they carefully carried him up from the cellar. As they made their way back to the house, Jack's mind raced. This was no random kidnapping. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide this man away, and now, they had to figure out who was behind it. Aisha, still in shock, stared at the man in disbelief. This wasn't just about her brother anymore. This was something much bigger, much darker. We need to get out of here, Vince said, his voice urgent. This place gives me the creeps. Jack nodded, his instincts telling him they had to move quickly. As they reached the front door, Jack heard something, a distant noise that made his blood run cold. The sound of footsteps. Someone was coming. Jack's hand went to the grip of his gun, but he didn't draw it yet. He needed to know who it was. The bikers spread out, their eyes scanning the trees. A shadow moved in the distance, and then another. They weren't alone. Aisha's grip tightened on Jack's sleeve as the footsteps grew louder. We have to go, she whispered. Jack nodded. Get on the bikes. We're not sticking around to find out who they are. The bikers raced outside there, engines roaring to life as they mounted their motorcycles. Jack grabbed Aisha and pulled her onto his bike, revving the engine as they sped off into the night. Behind them, the shack disappeared into the darkness, but Jack knew this wasn't over. They had a long ride ahead of them, and the real danger was just beginning. The night air was cold as the bikers sped through the winding roads, their engines roaring against the silence of the forest. The trees blurred into dark shadows around them, and the headlights cut through the darkness like knives. Jack's grip on the handlebars was tight, his mind racing as the events from earlier played over and over in his head. He had promised Aisha's father that he would protect her, but now the danger was far more complicated than he had imagined. What had started as a simple rescue mission had turned into something much darker, and Jack wasn't sure they were ready for what lay ahead. Aisha clung to him, her small arms wrapped around his waist, her body trembling with fear. Jack could feel her heartbeat against his back, each thud matching the rhythm of the motorcycle beneath him. She had seen something terrible in that shack, something he couldn't even begin to understand, and now, the weight of the situation hung heavy on both their shoulders. The group rode in silence for miles, the only sound the constant hum of their engines. They had one goal now: get to safety and figure out who was behind everything. They needed answers. The sun had long since set, and the city lights were barely visible in the distance when they finally arrived at their destination. The bikers pulled into a small, run-down motel on the outskirts of town, the flickering neon sign casting an eerie glow on the parking lot. Jack cut the engine and glanced at Aisha, who had stopped trembling, her eyes fixed on the ground. She was silent, her face pale, and Jack knew that the trauma of what she had seen was still fresh in her mind. "Stay close," Jack said quietly as he dismounted and offered his hand to Aisha. She nodded and followed him into the motel office, where a tired clerk sat behind the counter. Jack paid for a room, then led Aisha down the dimly lit hallway to their door. As they entered the room, the smell of stale carpet and old furniture hit them, but it was better than the darkness of the forest. Jack didn't trust the motel, but it was the only place they could stay for now. The bikers set up a perimeter outside, keeping watch while Jack and Aisha tried to get some rest. But sleep didn't come easily. Jack sat by the window, his eyes scanning the parking lot, his thoughts consumed by what they had discovered. The man they had found in the cellar, the one who had been locked away, was still unconscious. They had patched him up as best as they could, but Jack knew it wouldn't be long before the answers they needed started to slip through their fingers. The night dragged on, and the silence in the room became unbearable. Aisha had finally fallen asleep, her small form curled up on the bed, but Jack couldn't rest. His mind kept returning to the shack, to the strange hands that had pulled someone into the earth beneath it. Who was behind all of this? Why had they targeted Aisha's brother? And what was the connection to the man they had rescued? Just as Jack was about to close his eyes, a sharp knock on the door startled him. He stood up quickly, motioning for Aisha to stay down. He crept to the door and peeked through the peephole. It was Vince, his second in command, his face serious. Jack opened the door, and Vince stepped inside, looking around before speaking. "We've got a problem," Vince said, his voice low. "One of the guys spotted a car in the parking lot. It's the same one that was at the shack. Silver SUV, dark windows." Jack's heart skipped a beat. "How many?" Vince shrugged. "Could be one, could be more. But it's definitely them. They're looking for us." Jack's jaw tightened. This was it. The people who had been hiding in the shadows were closing in. He had no idea how they had found them, but it didn't matter now. They had to move fast. "We can't stay here," Jack said, grabbing his jacket. "Get the others. We're leaving." They gathered the bikers and quickly prepared to leave the motel. Jack didn't know what awaited them, but one thing was certain: the fight was far from over. As they revved their engines and pulled out of the parking lot, Jack glanced back at Aisha, still shaken, but resolute. She had been through more than any child should have to endure, but she was still standing. They all were. And that was why they were going to fight until the end. The group sped down the highway, their motorcycles slicing through the night like a wave of defiance. Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose, a sense of justice. They had no choice but to keep moving forward. The darkness ahead was unknown, but it didn't matter. They were ready, and they weren't going to stop until they had answers. The group of bikers raced through the empty highway, the roar of their engines reverberating through the night. The moon hung high above, barely visible through the thick clouds that threatened rain. Jack, at the front, kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his mind working in overdrive. Every twist and turn felt like it was leading them into deeper danger. Aisha, still clutching him tightly, seemed to have fallen into an uneasy sleep against his back, but Jack knew that wasn't going to last long. They had only one goal now: find out who was behind all this and protect the ones they loved. His mind kept returning to the man they had found in the cellar. Who was he? Why had he been hidden away for so long? And most importantly, what did he know about the dark forces lurking in the shadows? Jack's thoughts were interrupted by the crackling sound of his radio. Vince's voice came through, urgent and clear. "Jack, we've got a situation." Jack's grip tightened on the handlebars. "What's going on?" "The silver SUV. It's here," Vince replied. We spotted it a few miles back. They're following us. Jack's heart sank. This was the moment they had been dreading. How many? He asked, already knowing the answer. Enough, Vince said. We've got to shake them. They're not here for sightseeing. Jack's mind raced. He glanced back at the others in the convoy, all riding close behind, their headlights cutting through the night like a trail of fire. He couldn't risk them being caught in the middle of this. All right, listen up, Jack barked into the radio, his voice steady but commanding. We need to split up. Keep moving. No one gets left behind. If they're on our tail, we'll give them a reason to keep their distance. The bikers nodded in unison, their eyes sharp and determined. They had been through far worse. But this was personal. As they neared a fork in the road, Jack made the decision to take the less traveled route. It was a risky move, but it might buy them the time they needed. The road was narrow and twisted, lined with thick trees on either side. The kind of place where anyone who didn't know the area would easily lose their way. Jack revved his engine, pulling ahead of the pack, his heart racing. Behind him, the bikers followed suit, weaving through the winding path, the sound of their engines drowning out everything else. Aisha stirred slightly, still clinging to Jack, her face pressed against his back. Jack knew she was scared, but he also knew she was strong. They were all strong. It was the only way they were going to get through this. The road stretched ahead, darker and more treacherous as they sped deeper into the forest. The wind howled through the trees, and Jack's senses were on high alert. Every glance over his shoulder made him more certain that they were being followed. He could hear the sound of another engine, faint at first, but growing louder. The silver SUV was still behind them. Jack's grip on the handlebars tightened, and his mind raced with possible escape plans. But there was no time to think. The next bend in the road loomed ahead, and the riders needed to stay close, stay focused. Hold tight, Aisha, Jack muttered, more to himself than to her. We're almost there. He pushed the bike faster, the engine roaring beneath him as they rounded the curve. Ahead, the road opened up into a small clearing. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He could see headlights in the distance, the unmistakable gleam of the SUV. It was closing in fast. Vince, we need to lose them, Jack said into the radio. Get ready to move. The bikers sped up, pushing their machines to the limit as they navigated the treacherous path ahead. Jack's eyes were fixed on the clearing in front of them, the only way to escape being a steep hill to their right. He had to make it. Aisha's grip tightened around him as they reached the hill, the incline steep and dangerous. Now, Vince, Jack shouted. Vince and the others made their move, accelerating, their bikes kicking up dirt and gravel as they charged up the hill. But the silver SUV was relentless, its headlights cutting through the trees, closer now. Jack's bike lurched as he hit a rock in the road, but he managed to keep his balance. The hill was too steep. They were running out of time. The convoy made it to the top of the hill, the SUVs still closing in. Jack felt a rush of adrenaline flood his body as he gunned the engine. They couldn't stop now. Aisha's terrified face flashed in his mind, and his resolve hardened. This isn't over, he muttered to himself, pushing the bike even faster. Just ahead, a clearing appeared in the distance. Jack could see it, an old bridge that spanned a deep ravine. He knew the area well. The bridge was their only way out, but it was risky. The beams were old, and it hadn't been maintained in years. But it was their best chance. He had to make it. He couldn't let anything stop them now. The bikers followed, the engines roaring in perfect unison as they made their way to the bridge. Jack's heart raced as the gap between them and the SUV grew smaller. This was it. If they could just make it across, they'd be free. He pushed the bike forward, the edge of the ravine growing closer. The bridge loomed ahead like a shadow, a reminder of how far they had come. Jack's breath came in shallow gasps as he steered his bike onto the bridge, the metal beams creaking under the weight. The rest of the bikers followed, their bikes kicking up dust behind them. But just as Jack reached the middle of the bridge, he heard it, a sudden screech of tires, followed by a loud crash. He turned just in time to see the silver SUV barreling toward them, its tires skidding on the gravel. Jack's heart skipped a beat as the SUV careened toward the edge of the bridge. It was too late to stop. The SUV slammed into the guardrail, sending sparks flying as it teetered dangerously over the edge. Jack's mind raced, but there was no time to react. They were almost there, almost free. The sound of screeching tires echoed through the night as Jack's heart raced, his eyes glued to the silver SUV that had just slammed into the guardrail of the old bridge. The vehicle teetered dangerously, its front end hanging off the edge, ready to drop into the deep ravine below. Jack's bike skidded to a halt, his boots hitting the metal bridge with a loud thud. His breath came in short bursts as he glanced back at the rest of the bikers, who had all stopped in perfect formation behind him, their engines still running. The scene was tense, too quiet, too still for what had just happened. The SUV, which had been tailing them for miles, was now at the edge of disaster, and it was clear that whoever was behind the wheel had no intention of backing down. "Stay sharp," Jack said to Vince, who was already dismounting his bike, his face grim. "We're not out of the woods yet." Vince nodded, his hand resting on the grip of his gun, his eyes scanning the area. Jack motioned for Aisha to stay close, his heart heavy with the weight of everything that had led to this moment. They had come so far, but it felt like they were still in danger. It wasn't just the SUV. No, it was the people behind it. The ones who had orchestrated this nightmare. As the bikers slowly approached the SUV, the tension in the air was thick. The moonlight cast long shadows across the bridge, making it almost impossible to see what was happening inside the vehicle. Then, the door opened. A man stumbled out, his face obscured by the darkness, but the outline of his body was unmistakable. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with the kind of confidence that Jack had seen before, someone who had been in control of far worse situations. The man took a step forward, his boots scraping against the metal as he locked eyes with Jack. For a moment, neither of them moved. It was as if time had frozen. The man's expression was cold, calculating, but there was something else in his eyes, a sense of desperation. "You've made a big mistake, biker," the man said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is far from over." Jack didn't flinch. "It ends tonight," he replied, his voice steady, a stark contrast to the threat hanging in the air. The man smiled, but it wasn't a smile of triumph. It was a smile of someone who had a plan. He glanced back at the SUV, which was now completely tilted over the edge of the bridge. Then, without warning, he pulled something from his jacket. A small, black device that gleamed in the moonlight. Jack's instincts screamed at him to act, but it was too late. The man pressed a button, and within seconds, the SUV exploded in a ball of fire and smoke. The shockwave hit the bikers like a physical force, knocking them back as the flames illuminated the entire bridge. Jack's heart raced, but he didn't hesitate. "Move," he shouted, grabbing Aisha's hand and pulling her toward the bikes. The rest of the crew followed quickly, their motorcycles roaring to life as they sped away from the blast. Jack's mind was spinning. That explosion wasn't just a threat, it was a message. Whoever was behind this wasn't afraid to kill, to destroy everything in their path. The group rode hard, the sound of their engines drowning out the chaos behind them. But the night wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As they raced down the road, Jack's thoughts turned to Aisha. She had already been through so much, and now, she was living a nightmare. But one thing was clear, he wasn't going to let her down. He wasn't going to let anyone hurt her again. They rode through the winding roads, not stopping, not slowing down. The forest around them was dense, the trees closing in as if trying to swallow them whole. Jack's eyes darted from side to side, watching for any sign of movement, any hint that someone was following them. But the road was quiet, too quiet. Suddenly, a sharp turn appeared ahead, and Jack knew it was their only chance. He revved the engine and swerved to the right, his crew following suit. They cut through the dense woods, the narrow trail barely wide enough for the bikes to fit through. The trees scraped against their leather jackets, and the dirt kicked up behind them like a cloud of dust. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as they raced through the night. He had to keep going. There was no turning back now. As they continued down the narrow path, a shadow appeared ahead, a figure standing in the middle of the road. Jack's eyes narrowed as he slammed on the brakes, bringing his bike to a screeching halt. The rest of the crew followed suit, the sound of their bikes echoing through the woods. The figure in the road stepped forward, revealing a man dressed in dark clothes, his face obscured by a hood. He didn't speak, but his presence was enough. Jack's instincts screamed again. This wasn't just any man. It was someone connected to the people behind the explosion. He was here for a reason. Jack's hand instinctively went to his weapon, but the man held up a hand, signaling that he meant no harm. "I'm not here to fight," the man said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "But I'm here to warn you." Jack's grip on his weapon tightened, but he didn't draw it. "Warn me about what?" "You've made a powerful enemy," the man replied, "and they won't stop until they get what they want." Jack's mind raced. "Who are you?" The man's lips curled into a small smile. "Let's just say I'm someone who knows who you're up against." The man paused before adding, "But time's running out." And with that, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Jack and his crew standing in the middle of the woods, unsure of what to do next. The woods were eerily quiet as Jack and his crew continued their ride down the narrow, winding path. The man who had appeared in the road had vanished into the shadows, leaving behind only the heavy silence of the forest. The warning he had given them echoed in Jack's mind. "You've made a powerful enemy, and they won't stop until they get what they want." Jack wasn't sure who the man was or what exactly he knew, but one thing was clear. Things were getting worse, and they needed answers. Aisha, still clinging to Jack, seemed to sense the tension in the air. Her small voice broke the silence, trembling but steady. "Are we safe, Jack?" she asked. Jack glanced over his shoulder, meeting her gaze. Her face was pale, but her eyes held a flicker of hope. "We're safe for now," he replied, though he wasn't sure how much longer that would be true. The group continued riding, but the sense of unease only deepened. The man's warning wasn't just a random threat. It felt personal, as if whoever was behind all this knew exactly who they were and what they were capable of. The idea that they were being watched, tracked, and hunted sent a chill down Jack's spine. The road ahead seemed to stretch on forever, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being led into a trap. The trees closed in tighter around them, the darkness growing thicker as the night wore on. Jack's instincts were on high alert, his eyes darting from side to side, scanning for any signs of danger. As they neared a small clearing, Jack motioned for the others to slow down. The group came to a stop, their bikes humming softly in the quiet night. Jack dismounted and signaled for the rest of the crew to gather around. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. Vince, his second in command, approached, his face grim. "What's going on, Jack?" he asked, sensing the tension in the air. Jack looked around at his crew. There were 7 of them now, all hardened veterans, each one having fought their own battles. They had each other's backs, but tonight felt different. It felt like they were about to face something far bigger than anything they had dealt with before. "That man we encountered. He knows something," Jack began. "I don't know who he is, but I can tell he's connected to the people after us. Whoever is behind this, they're not just playing games. This is real." Vince nodded, his brow furrowed. "So what now?" Jack exhaled, rubbing his hand over his face. "We keep moving. We can't stop now. We need to find out who these people are and what they want." He turned to Aisha, who was standing a few feet away, her eyes wide with fear. Jack's heart clenched. She was just a kid, and yet she had already seen more than anyone should have to. "Aisha," he said softly, walking over to her. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "Are you okay?" She nodded slowly but said nothing. Jack could see the fear in her eyes, and it tore at him. This wasn't a life a child should be living, but it was the life they were forced into. "We're going to keep you safe," Jack said, his voice firm. Aisha gave him a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Jack turned back to the group. "All right, we need to split up. We'll cover more ground that way. Vince, you take the west trail. Bear, you and Thor take the north. The rest of us will head south. We'll meet up back here in 2 hours." The bikers nodded in agreement, already preparing to head in their respective directions. Jack glanced at Aisha one last time before mounting his bike and revving the engine. The rest of the group followed suit, their motorcycles roaring to life as they dispersed into the night. Jack couldn't help but feel like they were walking into something far bigger than they had anticipated. The thought of what they might find out there, the people they were up against, the secrets they were about to uncover, left him uneasy. But he had made a promise to Aisha's father. He was going to protect her, no matter what it took. The forest was dense, the air thick with the smell of earth and pine. The sounds of their bikes echoed through the trees as they moved deeper into the wilderness. Jack's mind kept returning to the man they had encountered earlier, the man who had warned them. Who was he? What did he know? And why had he chosen to help them? Jack wasn't sure, but he had a sinking feeling that they were being played. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly, the road ahead blurred by the darkness. Jack felt a sense of urgency building within him. They had to find answers, and they had to find them soon. The deeper they went into the woods, the more dangerous it felt. He could feel it in his bones. Something was waiting for them. Something that had been pulling the strings from the shadows, orchestrating the events that had brought them to this point. And as much as Jack wanted to believe they could outsmart whatever it was, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The silence of the forest was broken only by the sound of their engines, but Jack knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. The danger was closing in, and the truth was just out of reach. The forest was dense, the trees looming tall and silent as Jack and his crew moved deeper into the heart of it. The tension in the air was thick, the kind of silence that warned something was just about to happen. Jack could feel it in his gut, that same uneasy sensation that had plagued him since they had first gotten on their bikes. Every turn, every shadow, every noise in the distance made his skin crawl. He had to keep moving forward. There was no turning back now. He had made a promise to Aisha's father, and he was going to keep it. His crew was scattered across the woods, each one of them on high alert, searching for any clue that would bring them closer to the truth. They were getting closer to the heart of this mystery, but the deeper they went, the more dangerous it felt. Jack's mind kept going back to the explosion. That moment when the silver SUV had crashed and exploded right in front of them. The man who had triggered it, the one with the black device. Who was he? What did he know? And why had he tried to kill them? Jack didn't have answers yet, but he was determined to find them. The night was getting colder, the sound of the motorcycles reverberating off the trees, breaking the stillness. Jack glanced over his shoulder, making sure the others were still close. Aisha was riding behind him, her grip tight on his jacket as they made their way down a narrow trail. Her small body was tense, her eyes scanning the darkness around them. Jack could see the fear in her eyes, but there was something else there too. Something stronger. She was brave. And for that, Jack was determined to protect her with everything he had. "Stay close, Aisha," Jack said softly, though his voice was drowned out by the rumble of the engines. She nodded without saying anything, her focus fixed ahead. Jack wasn't sure if she understood the gravity of the situation, but he knew it wasn't his place to explain it to her. She was just a kid. She should be safe, somewhere far from all this danger. But life didn't always give you the luxury of safety. The trail ahead was getting steeper, the trees thickening as they ventured further into the wilderness. The light from the motorcycle's headlights barely cut through the darkness, and the road seemed to disappear into nothingness. The sound of a distant river reached their ears, a low, rumbling sound that reminded Jack of the wildness of the world around them. As they rounded a bend, Jack saw something that made his heart skip a beat. A figure stood ahead, barely visible in the distance, outlined by the faint light of the bikes. The figure didn't move, but something about its presence made the hair on the back of Jack's neck stand up. He slowed his bike, pulling up to a stop just a few feet away from the figure. The rest of the crew followed suit, each biker coming to a halt, their engines now silent. The figure stepped forward, and Jack's eyes narrowed as he recognized the shape of a man. He was tall, wearing a dark coat that blended with the night, and his face was obscured by the shadows. "Who are you?" Jack called out, his voice steady, but his hand instinctively went to the handle of his weapon. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate step forward, his boots crunching on the forest floor. Jack could feel the tension rising in the air. The man wasn't someone they were familiar with, but there was something unsettling about him. "I think you know who I am," the man said finally, his voice low and gravelly. Jack's pulse quickened. "What do you want?" The man smiled, a cold, unsettling smile that sent a chill down Jack's spine. "What do you think I want?" he replied. "You've been digging around, haven't you? You've been getting too close to the truth." Jack's eyes locked onto the man's, trying to read him, trying to understand what was happening. This wasn't just some random encounter. The man knew something. Something Jack needed to know. The truth about what? Jack demanded, his voice now edged with urgency. "About who's been pulling the strings. About who's been behind all of this," the man said, his eyes flicking briefly to Aisha, who was still clinging to Jack's back. "You're in deeper than you think." Jack's mind raced. This man wasn't just an obstacle. They were getting closer to the heart of whatever had been happening. But the more they learned, the more dangerous it became. "I won't let you hurt her," Jack said, his voice unwavering. The man's smile faded, replaced by something darker. "You don't get to decide that," he sneered. "You've already made your choice. Now you have to live with it." Jack's grip tightened on the bike, his instincts screaming at him to act, but he held back. He knew they were being watched, and every move they made was being calculated. This was more than just a fight. It was a game, and the stakes were higher than they had ever imagined. The man took another step forward, but before Jack could react, the man turned sharply, disappearing into the shadows of the forest as quickly as he had appeared. Jack stood frozen for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. The tension in the air remained, thick and suffocating. "What do we do now?" Vince asked, breaking the silence. Jack glanced back at him, his eyes hard with resolve. "We keep going," he said. "We can't stop now." The group remounted their bikes, and as they rode off into the darkness, Jack's mind raced with the words the man had said. They were getting closer to the truth, but at what cost? And what else was waiting for them in the shadows? The night stretched on, thick with tension as the bikers sped deeper into the dense forest. The strange encounter with the shadowed figure had left them all unsettled, but Jack couldn't afford to lose focus. The man's warning echoed in his mind. "You're in deeper than you think." It felt like a puzzle that was being pieced together, one dangerous clue at a time. Jack's grip on the handlebars tightened as the sound of the engines cut through the heavy silence. The trail ahead was unfamiliar, the trees growing closer, casting eerie shadows across the path. Jack kept his eyes fixed on the road, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Aisha. She had seen too much. A child shouldn't have to live through this. Yet here they were, racing through the wilderness in the dead of night, with enemies lurking at every turn. The rest of the crew was close behind, their presence a silent promise that they weren't alone in this. Vince's voice crackled through the radio, low but clear. "Jack, we've got company. A couple of bikes. We're being followed." Jack didn't flinch. He had known this was coming. They were being hunted, no doubt about it. "How many?" Jack replied, keeping his voice calm. "3, maybe more," Vince said. "They're keeping their distance for now, but they're gaining." Jack's jaw clenched. He wasn't surprised. Whoever had been behind the silver SUV wasn't going to let them slip away easily. They had made their move. Now, it was time to face the consequences. Jack glanced back at Aisha, her face tense against the wind, but her eyes were filled with resolve. She had been through so much already, and yet, she held it together, clutching onto Jack as if she knew this wasn't the end. It was almost as if she could sense what was coming next. Jack's heart tightened. He couldn't let anything happen to her. "Not now. Stay close," Jack said, his voice steady but filled with an urgency that wasn't lost on Aisha. She nodded, her grip tightening on his jacket. He could feel her fear, but there was something else, something stronger, something that told him she was going to be okay. For now, at least. The path ahead grew darker as they sped deeper into the woods. The distant sound of the pursuing motorcycles was getting louder, closer, but Jack had no intention of running anymore. He was done being chased. He was done being a step behind. It was time to take control. "Vince, Bear, Thor, get ready," Jack said into the radio, his voice low but sharp. "We're not running anymore. We're taking a stand." There was a brief pause, and then Vince's voice came through, steady and firm. "Copy that." Jack took a sharp turn off the main trail, veering into a small clearing that opened up to a wide, moonlit field. The perfect place to face whatever was coming their way. The rest of the crew followed his lead, their bikes skidding into position, forming a protective circle around Jack and Aisha. Jack dismounted and motioned for the others to stay on their bikes, ready for whatever came next. The sound of the approaching motorcycles grew louder, and soon, 3 dark figures emerged from the trees. They were moving fast, their headlights cutting through the night like knives. Jack's eyes narrowed. These weren't just random bikers. They were the same ones who had been trailing them earlier. The ones who had been sent to finish the job. They stopped just outside the circle of bikers, their engines idling. Jack's gaze met the leader of the group, a tall man with a scarred face and dark sunglasses that hid his eyes. "I don't know who you are, but I'm done running," Jack said, his voice cold. The man laughed, a low, rumbling sound that didn't match the tension in the air. "You should have stayed out of this," the man said, his voice dripping with menace. "Now, you're going to pay the price." Jack didn't flinch. He knew what was at stake, and he wasn't about to back down. "We're not your prey," Jack said. "You want to fight? You got it." The man's expression darkened, but before he could make a move, one of Jack's crew, Vince, stepped forward, his hand on the grip of his gun. "This isn't your fight," Vince said, his voice low and threatening. "Leave now, and you won't regret it." The tension was thick in the air, the standoff building as both sides measured each other up. But then, just as the situation seemed to reach its breaking point, a loud noise echoed through the forest. The sound of something moving fast, something big. The bikers turned their heads in unison, confusion crossing their faces. Jack's eyes darted to the edge of the field, where the shadows of trees seemed to move. Then, out of the darkness, a massive truck came into view, its headlights blinding. The truck sped toward them, crashing through the underbrush, and before Jack could react, it slammed to a halt just feet away from the group. The door to the truck opened, and a man stepped out, his silhouette massive in the glow of the headlights. The man was older, his face rugged and weathered, but there was something about him that felt familiar. "I suggest you all stand down," the man said, his voice gruff but authoritative. "You've been hunting the wrong people." Jack's heart skipped a beat. Who was this man, and why did he feel like he knew him? The tension in the air shifted, and for the first time that night, Jack felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe they weren't alone in this fight. Maybe, just maybe, there were people out there who could help them. The man stepped forward, locking eyes with Jack. "I've been watching you," the man said, "and I think you're going to need more than just a bike to survive what's coming." Jack's mind raced, but he knew one thing for sure. They weren't done yet. The game had just changed. And now, the real fight was about to begin. The man stepped closer, his silhouette now clear under the headlights of the truck. The air was thick with tension as Jack and the bikers stood in a silent standoff, unsure of what to make of this new player. The truck, with its oversized wheels and rugged exterior, looked like something out of a war zone, heavy-duty, built for destruction, and clearly not the kind of vehicle that made appearances without purpose. Aisha clung to Jack, her small frame tense against his back. The man's gaze shifted to her for a moment before locking back onto Jack's eyes. "I'm here because you've been digging in places you shouldn't," the man said, his voice deep and gravelly. "But it's not too late to get out of this. You're in over your heads." Jack didn't flinch, keeping his hand on the throttle of his bike, ready to move if necessary. "And who exactly are you?" he asked, his voice steady, though his mind raced with possibilities. The man gave a faint smile, his eyes cold and calculating. "Name's Cole," he said simply, "and I know exactly who's after you. I've been watching you since the beginning." Jack's pulse quickened. Watching us. The realization hit him hard. This wasn't just a random encounter. The man had been tracking their every move. "What do you want from us?" Cole's smile faded. "I'm not your enemy, but I'm not your friend either. What you're up against is bigger than anything you've dealt with, and you're going to need help." Jack's mind spun, his thoughts scrambling for a plan. "Why should we trust you?" he demanded. Cole took a long breath, stepping closer to the edge of the bridge, looking out into the woods beyond. "Because I know what's coming, and I can help you survive it. But only if you listen." Jack exchanged a look with Vince, who was watching the scene with caution. "We don't have time to play games," Vince said, his voice tight. "If you know something, you better start talking." Cole didn't respond right away. Instead, he turned, gesturing toward the truck behind him. "This isn't just about you anymore," Cole said. "What's happening? It's part of something much bigger. A syndicate. A group with power, political, financial, and ruthless. They've been operating in the shadows for years, and now, they've got their sights set on you." Jack's stomach tightened at the mention of the word syndicate. This was no longer just a group of people playing petty games. It was organized, dangerous, and far-reaching. "What do they want with us?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Cole looked back at him, his eyes cold, yet there was a glimmer of something else, something Jack couldn't quite read. "They want to send a message," Cole said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "You've been poking around, asking questions. They don't like that. They'll do anything to keep their secrets buried." Jack stepped forward, his fists clenched. "So what do we do now?" Cole looked at him with an almost pitying gaze. "You stop running and start fighting. You can't outrun this. The only way out is through." Jack's heart pounded in his chest. Fighting? He had been doing nothing but fighting since this whole nightmare began. But this, This was something else. You're not the first to get pulled into this mess, Cole continued. You're not the first to find yourself on the wrong side of their wrath. But you can be the last. If you're smart, if you listen, we can put an end to this before it goes any further. Jack didn't know if he could trust this man. But what he did know was that they were running out of time. What's the plan? He asked, his voice now steady with resolve. Cole nodded, as if he had been waiting for that question. We need to take out their communication channels. We need to cripple their ability to track you and control the situation. But to do that, we need access to one of their strongholds. Jack's mind immediately began to race, calculating the risks and possibilities. You're talking about infiltrating their base? He asked, his voice low with disbelief. That's suicide. Cole's expression hardened. If you want to survive, it's not about playing it safe. It's about doing what's necessary. And that means taking the fight to them. They've been hiding in plain sight, controlling everything from behind the scenes. But if we hit them where it hurts, we can force them into the open. We can make them pay. Jack's heart was pounding now, adrenaline kicking in. This was bigger than he had ever imagined. This wasn't just about Aisha anymore. It was about taking down a powerful organization that had been manipulating things for far too long. But the stakes were higher than ever. How do we get to them? Jack asked, the words coming out more desperate than he meant. We start by getting you to a safe location, Cole said, his tone shifting to something more practical. Then, we'll make our move. It won't be easy, and it won't be fast. But it's the only way. You have to trust me. Jack hesitated, looking over at his crew, the familiar faces of his bikers. They had been through hell together, and now they were being asked to face the most dangerous challenge yet. But deep down, Jack knew there was no other choice. He couldn't let fear hold him back. Not when Aisha's life, and the lives of everyone else who had been caught in this, were at stake. All right, Jack said, finally nodding. Let's do it. The group mounted their bikes once again, the sound of engines roaring to life filling the air. Jack glanced at Aisha, who was still holding onto him tightly, her face pale but determined. They weren't done yet. The fight was just beginning, and this time, they had someone on their side who knew exactly what they were up against. Cole climbed into his truck, the engine starting with a loud growl as he led the way. Jack followed closely behind, his mind set on the mission ahead. Whatever came next, they were ready. The real battle was about to begin. The convoy rode through the dense forest, the engines of their bikes roaring through the night air. The truck in front led the way, with Cole at the wheel, his expression unreadable as he glanced occasionally in the rearview mirror. Jack's grip on the handlebars was tight, his focus on the road ahead, but his mind raced with everything that had happened. Every twist and turn, every unexpected encounter, only seemed to pull them deeper into a web of danger. Jack had seen a lot in his life, fought battles, made decisions that put his life on the line, but this was different. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about taking down an organization that had its claws deep into everything around them. As they moved further into the woods, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. His instincts told him they weren't alone, but there was no sign of any pursuit. No sounds of engines or footsteps, only the eerie quiet of the forest surrounding them. Aisha, still riding behind Jack, seemed unusually calm now. Perhaps it was the presence of Cole, or perhaps the adrenaline of the past few days had made her numb to the fear. Jack glanced back at her, meeting her eyes for a brief moment. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile, one that made his heart ache. She had been through so much, and yet she still managed to hold on to hope. That hope was what kept Jack going. As the miles passed, the road grew narrower, and the trees grew thicker, creating a canopy that blocked out most of the moonlight. The headlights of the bikes cut through the darkness, casting long, shifting shadows on the forest floor. The air grew colder, the wind whispering through the trees, but there was something else in the air, a sense of foreboding. Jack's senses were on high alert as they neared their destination. Cole's truck slowed to a stop at the edge of a large clearing, and the bikers followed suit, coming to a halt in a loose circle. The silence that followed was deafening. This is it, Cole said, stepping out of the truck. The entrance is just up ahead. We need to move quickly. Once we're inside, there's no turning back. Jack nodded, his mind already calculating their next steps. The group dismounted, their boots crunching on the dirt as they gathered around Cole. What exactly are we walking into? Jack asked, his voice steady but filled with a sense of urgency. Cole looked at him, his eyes hard and knowing. This isn't a place you can just waltz into, he said, his tone grim. This is their headquarters. Well, one of them. They've got people everywhere, and it's heavily guarded. But it's the key to everything. If we can take this place down, we cripple their operation. It won't be easy, but it's the only shot we've got. Jack looked around at his crew. Each one of them had been through hell with him. But this was something else. We'll do whatever it takes, Jack said firmly. He turned to Aisha, who was standing quietly at the edge of the group, her face a mixture of fear and determination. Stay close, Aisha. We're not leaving you behind. She nodded, her grip on his jacket tightening. Jack could see the fear in her eyes, but she wasn't showing it. She was braver than anyone he knew. All right, Jack said, his voice low but clear. Let's move. The group began to move, keeping low as they crept toward the entrance to the hidden compound. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet, as if it were holding its breath. Every step felt like it could be their last. Cole led the way, his experience guiding them through the dense woods. They moved in silence, barely making a sound as they reached a small, nondescript building hidden among the trees. This is it, Cole whispered. The entrance is around the back. They approached the building cautiously, staying in the shadows as much as possible. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as they reached the back of the building. There were no guards in sight, nothing but the faint sound of machinery from within. But Jack knew better than to trust appearances. You go in first, Jack said to Cole, his voice sharp. Cole nodded and motioned for the others to stay back. He approached the door, his movements swift and silent. With a quick flick of his wrist, the door creaked open just enough for them to slip inside. The air was musty, filled with the scent of old wood and damp earth. The interior was dark, the only light coming from a single flickering bulb overhead. Cole led them down a narrow hallway, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Jack kept close behind, his senses on high alert. They had no idea what was waiting for them inside. But one thing was clear, there was no turning back now. As they moved deeper into the compound, Jack's mind raced. What would they find here? Was it the end of the road, or just another beginning? The sound of footsteps echoed through the hall, and Jack froze. They weren't alone. Get ready, Cole whispered, signaling for the group to stop. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and Jack's grip tightened on the handle of his gun. He motioned for Aisha to stay behind him, her small frame hidden in the shadows as they waited for whatever was about to come. The footsteps stopped just ahead, and for a moment, everything was still. Then, the door at the end of the hallway burst open, and a group of armed men stepped out. They were wearing black uniforms, their faces obscured by masks. You shouldn't have come here, one of them said, his voice muffled by the mask. Now you'll pay the price. The standoff had begun, and Jack knew there was no backing down. It was fight or die. The masked men stepped forward, their guns raised, and the tension in the room reached a breaking point. Jack could feel the weight of the moment, the danger closing in from all sides. There was no time to second-guess, no room for hesitation. This was a fight they hadn't asked for, but one they had been forced into. Jack's eyes locked onto the man who had spoken. His voice was cold and unyielding, and there was a sense of finality to his words. You shouldn't have come here, the man repeated, his tone like ice. Now you'll pay the price. Jack's grip tightened on the handle of his gun, the cool metal providing some semblance of stability in the chaos. His mind raced, calculating the best move, the quickest way out of this alive. Behind him, he could hear the others shifting, preparing for what was to come. He could sense the fear, but also the determination. They weren't backing down. Aisha, though hidden behind him, was still close enough for Jack to feel her presence. The weight of responsibility hung on his shoulders, but he couldn't afford to let that distract him. Not now. Not when they were outnumbered. The leader of the masked men took another step forward, his eyes glinting from behind the mask. You think you can just walk in here and disrupt everything? The man sneered. You don't know who you're dealing with. Jack remained silent, his expression hard. He had heard enough of these threats to last a lifetime. It was time for action. He nodded subtly to Vince, who was standing just behind him, ready for anything. The others were already moving into position, forming a loose but tight circle around the enemy. Jack's eyes darted toward the exit, calculating the distance, the best route to get them out. But before he could make a move, Cole's voice broke through the tension. "Not yet," he said, his tone calm, almost detached. "We need to know who they are first. We need information." The masked man sneered. "You think we're going to just tell you everything? You're in our house now. You're not leaving until we say so." Jack's jaw clenched. "I don't think you understand," he said, his voice cutting through the man's threats. "We didn't come here for you, but we're not leaving without answers." The room seemed to hold its breath, the standoff stretching longer with every passing second. Jack's instincts were screaming at him to act, to do something before they were caught off guard. But Cole was right. They needed information. They needed to find out who was really pulling the strings. Without warning, the silence was broken by the loud sound of a door slamming open at the far end of the room. The masked men immediately turned, their attention divided as footsteps echoed from the hallway. Jack's heart skipped a beat as a new figure appeared, stepping into the dim light. This new person was older, taller, and moved with an air of authority. There was something about him that immediately made the atmosphere in the room shift. He was in charge. "Enough," the man said, his voice smooth and authoritative. "Leave them." The masked men hesitated for a moment before lowering their weapons, their body language shifting from confrontational to obedient. Jack's eyes narrowed, trying to read this new figure. The man stepped into the room, his sharp gaze sweeping over Jack and the bikers. "I assume you're the ones causing all this trouble," he said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "You don't belong here. But then again, neither do I." Jack didn't respond. Instead, he stayed focused, watching the man closely, trying to get a sense of what kind of power he held. "Who are you?" Jack asked, his voice hard and steady. The man smiled again, this time with more amusement. "Who I am is irrelevant," he replied, his tone dismissive. "What matters is that you're standing in my way. And that's something I don't tolerate." Jack's grip tightened on his gun, his mind racing. This man wasn't just some hired muscle. He was someone important, someone powerful. Jack needed to know who he was and how deep this went. The man's eyes flicked briefly to Aisha, who was still hidden behind Jack. He paused, his gaze lingering for a moment too long. "Ah," the man said, his smile widening. "I see. You're not just here for a fight, are you? This is personal." Jack didn't flinch. "What do you know about this?" he demanded. "I know enough to make sure you don't walk out of here alive," the man said coldly, stepping closer. Jack could feel the temperature in the room drop, the danger closing in on them like a vice. The air was thick with tension, each second stretching longer than the last. He knew they were on the brink of something far worse. There was no way out without confronting this. But before Jack could react, the man spoke again, his voice softer this time. "You think you've been hunting me," he said, his voice almost sympathetic. "But you've been chasing ghosts. The people you've been after, the ones you think are behind this, they're nothing but pawns. You're not looking in the right places." Jack's mind raced. This wasn't just a group of criminals. This was something much bigger, something far more dangerous. The realization hit him like a freight train. He wasn't just fighting for his life. He was fighting for something much more. "Where are they?" Jack demanded. "Tell me what I need to know." The man's smile returned, but it wasn't a friendly one. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they know the game is over. "You'll find out soon enough," he said, turning away. "But by then, it'll be too late." As the man walked away, Jack's heart pounded in his chest. They weren't done yet. The fight had just begun, and the real enemy had yet to show their face. The room was silent as the man walked away, his footsteps echoing in the dimly lit hallway. Jack's grip on his weapon was steady, but inside, his mind was racing. The man's words hung in the air like a cloud, his cryptic warning chilling Jack to the core. "You've been chasing ghosts," he had said. "You're not looking in the right places." Jack's eyes narrowed as he looked around at his crew. The masked men had backed off, their posture now less aggressive, but the tension was far from over. They were being played, Jack could feel it. Everything they had fought for, all the battles they had fought so far, had led them here, into a deadly game with rules they didn't fully understand. "What does he mean?" Vince's voice broke through Jack's thoughts. "Who's pulling the strings here?" Jack didn't answer right away. His mind was piecing together the fragmented clues. It wasn't just about the bikers, or Aisha, or even the people who had been after them. This was something far more dangerous, something deeper than he could have ever imagined. "We need to get to the bottom of this," Jack said finally, his voice firm. He turned to Cole, who had been silent since the man had spoken. You've been in this world longer than we have. What do you know about them? Cole's eyes flickered with something. Maybe hesitation, maybe regret, but his voice was steady. They've got their hands in everything. Government, business, law enforcement. People think they're untouchable. Jack's stomach twisted. This was bigger than he thought. They weren't just up against a criminal gang. They were up against a shadowy network that controlled everything from behind the scenes. How do we stop them? Jack asked, his voice hard. You don't, Cole replied, his face grim. You just survive. You fight when you have to, but you don't play their game. If they want you gone, they'll make sure it happens. The best you can do is keep your head down, keep moving. Jack's fists clenched. Not an option, he muttered under his breath. He couldn't let them win. He couldn't let Aisha and the others fall victim to this twisted game. We have to make a move. Cole shook his head. You don't understand, he said, his voice low. They've been watching you from the moment you stepped onto this path. You're in too deep. Jack's eyes darkened. I'm not backing down. Not now. Not ever. The man who had spoken earlier, the one who had warned them, had left them with more questions than answers. But one thing was certain, the fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Jack stepped forward, his mind made up. We can't wait for them to come to us. We have to hit them first. Vince, Bear, and Thorne nodded in agreement, their faces set with determination. They had been through worse, and now they had a chance to put an end to this. They weren't going to let the enemy control their fate. Jack turned to Aisha, who had been standing quietly, her eyes wide but focused. You stay close to us, Aisha. We're not leaving you behind. She nodded, her small hand gripping Jack's jacket tightly. Jack's heart ached for her. She had seen too much, had lived through too much, and yet, she still had the strength to keep going. She was brave. Jack turned to Cole, his eyes narrowing. We need to know where they are, where they're hiding. Cole hesitated before answering. I can get you close, but it won't be easy. They've got eyes everywhere. It's a maze of lies and corruption. Jack's eyes burned with resolve. We don't need easy. We need answers. And we'll take them, no matter what it takes. The room fell silent for a moment, as everyone processed what Jack had just said. It was clear now, there was no turning back. They had stepped into something far bigger than themselves. But they weren't afraid. They had each other, and they had their fight. Jack walked toward the door, his crew falling in line behind him. They had a plan, and they were going to see it through. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was for sure. They weren't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. They would keep fighting. They would keep pushing forward. They would take down the network that had been pulling the strings, one piece at a time. And they would make sure they didn't stop until the truth was out. Jack's heart raced as they stepped out into the cold night air. The stars above were hidden behind clouds, the world around them quiet, but the silence was about to be shattered. They had a target, and they were closing in on it. There was no more running. This was the final fight. They were going to take everything from the people who thought they could control them. Jack knew the stakes were higher than ever, but he also knew one thing. If they didn't stop now, there would be no future for any of them. And so, with the weight of everything on his shoulders, Jack led the charge into the unknown, ready to face whatever came next. The final confrontation was looming. Jack and his crew had been pushing forward relentlessly, following the trail of shadows and deception that had entangled them in this nightmare. They had made it this far, but now the truth was within reach, and the danger was closing in. As they neared the compound, the weight of everything they had fought for pressed down on Jack. He could feel the tension in the air, thick with the promise of a battle they couldn't avoid. Aisha was riding behind him again, her grip firm on his jacket, her presence a constant reminder of what was at stake. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for her, for all of them. The compound loomed ahead, its silhouette dark against the sky. Jack's mind raced with plans, with strategies, with every possible scenario. But deep down, he knew there was no perfect plan. It would be a fight, and it would be brutal. But they were ready. The bikers slowed as they reached the perimeter, keeping a careful distance from the compound's gates. The trucks, the men in black, the fortified walls, it all screamed danger. This was their final destination, and Jack had one mission now. Take down the organization and destroy everything they had built. Get ready, Jack said, his voice low but firm. His crew nodded, their eyes steely with determination. We move in 5 minutes, he added, making sure everyone was prepared. The silence between them spoke volumes. They had been through too much to turn back now. Jack's heart beat in sync with the adrenaline rushing through his veins. They had made it this far, and there was no going back. The rest of the crew spread out, finding their positions and getting ready for what was about to happen. Aisha was with Vince, hidden behind a pile of debris, where she would be safe but close enough to Jack if anything went wrong. Cole, the man who had led them this far, was standing near the entrance, looking for any signs of movement. Jack stayed low, his eyes scanning the compound. It was quiet, too quiet. He knew better than to trust the silence. It was a trap. It had to be. He motioned for the others to move. The bikers crept forward, staying low and keeping to the shadows, their every step calculated. The night was their ally, but they couldn't rely on that for long. They had one shot. The closer they got to the gates, the more the tension built. Jack could feel the sweat dripping down his back, but he ignored it, keeping his focus on the task at hand. The compound was a fortress. There were guards at every corner, cameras watching their every move. Jack had no illusions about how difficult this would be, but they couldn't let fear stop them now. They had to get inside, had to take down the heart of the operation. They had to expose the truth. The plan was simple. Get in, find the central hub, destroy everything. If they did that, they could bring the whole network to its knees. Jack could see the gate in front of him, the heavy iron bars looming like a wall. They were close now. He motioned for Vince and Bear to cover the sides, and he made his move toward the gate, his eyes scanning for guards. As he reached the gate, Jack heard footsteps behind him. A guard was approaching, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. Jack froze, his heart pounding in his chest. But before the guard could spot him, Vince stepped from the shadows, silently knocking the guard out with a swift strike. Jack nodded in approval. Nice work, he whispered. They had to move fast. The gate was unlocked, just as Cole had promised. They slipped through, one by one, entering the compound. The air inside was thick with tension, the quiet broken only by the distant hum of machinery and the occasional guard's footsteps. Jack led the way, his heart racing as they navigated the narrow pathways between the buildings. They had to stay focused. Every step brought them closer to the truth. Jack felt a strange sense of finality as they neared the central building. This was it, the moment of truth. They were about to confront the people who had been behind everything. Jack's mind was filled with questions, but there was no time to think about them now. They had come too far to stop. As they reached the entrance, Jack motioned for the group to halt. He pulled out his gun, checking to make sure it was ready. On 3, he whispered. 1, 2, 3. The doors burst open, and the group stormed in, their guns raised, ready to face whatever lay inside. The sound of gunfire echoed through the building, the tension so thick you could feel it in the air. They had expected a fight, but they weren't prepared for what they found. Inside, the walls were lined with monitors, displaying footage from all over the compound. It was clear that this place wasn't just a hideout, it was a nerve center. The operation they were up against was far bigger than they had imagined. And then, in the center of the room, they saw him, the man behind everything, the one they had been searching for. His face was familiar. Jack's blood ran cold as he realized who it was. It was someone they knew, someone who had been pulling the strings from the beginning. The man looked up, his cold eyes locking onto Jack's. You think you've won? He sneered. This is just the beginning. Jack's breath caught in his throat. They weren't done yet. This was only the first step in a much larger battle. But Jack wasn't afraid. Not anymore. He had come too far to stop now. And this time, they would finish it. The fight for their future had only just begun.